Hey students, I want to finish our lecture on Chapter 3 for the Introduction to Human Services class, and so I'm going to be looking a little bit at my notes but also at the lecture outline 3.1 and lecture outline 3.2. When we talked earlier today, we finished up by considering, let me look back at my notes, what we last talked about in the class. Problems with delivery to services for rural residents. And so now I'm going on to the human services in industry, the military, and schools, and kind of how those play out. So talking about industry first, I want to mention that industry really has never been very interested in providing human services to its workers. The only reason that companies and business concerns have provided services to their employees is really to help them avoid absenteeism and people being off the job. So that's really where services at business came into being, and they were called Employee Assistance Programs, or EAPs. And so those are the offices in people's HR departments at work that might have services available, although it seems that I'm not sure those are very strong anymore. And then looking at mentioning the military, on your lecture outline it mentions the Hughes Act, but I'll also talk about the Services to Armed Forces Act, which was from 1976, which required the military to meet the human services needs of service members and their families. 1976 was a long time ago, and more modern services have become available, particularly with the multiple deployments that our service members have more recently had to endure and their families have had to endure. So this new battle theater seems to have required different kinds of services to families. But in the old days, what was available to service members was a chaplain, and that was it. And so now, those of you who are military service veterans, when you think about what's available, even though it's not perfect, even though you constantly have to get used to a new provider or a new therapist, there are services available for family members as well as service members, mainly related to trauma, depression, and anxiety, because those are the effects of the last war theaters we've been involved in. In terms of human services that are provided in schools, on Wednesday when I see you, we will have a guest speaker that I mentioned to you today, excuse me, who works at an alternative school in Moore County. And so her job would fall under the category of school-based services. And so schools are trying to help students and families be more successful. Schools are also, along with the military, trying to work on ways to teach people about being resilient. And so this is something that's happening in the schools as well as in the military. They're trying to keep school more relevant for students and trying to keep students in school. And so obviously you know, and I know, that children as well as young people, youth, come to school with all kinds of problems and concerns and stressors. And it's very hard to learn and pay attention and be your best self, no matter what your age is, really, when you have something bad happening to you or something stressful happening to you. And so schools are working, I think, as hard as they can, well, within their funding limitations, to help with attendance, keep students in school, and prevent dropout. And so the challenge for schools is to try to adopt a team approach with parents, between parents and school personnel, and they don't want to duplicate services either. Goals are to keep students and families healthy, to keep kids in school, to graduate, and to, again, as I said, try to promote resilience by providing useful services to kids. And in your textbook, there's an example, I think, of on page 94 and 95. I'm just going to turn there right now. Of a school. Nope, it's not in this textbook. Never mind. I take it back. Forgive me. That's not in this textbook. So the next part of the lecture is how has technology affected the delivery of human services? And boy, is this ever a huge topic and a huge change. And I would say that sort of in the old way of delivering services, it was such that you had an office, you worked for an agency or for a government agency, and clients came to you. And they made an appointment, and they came and traveled to you. And there's still that happening. But there are many, many, many other ways that students, not just students, but clients can be served without having to drive to an office. And sometimes I hear students talking about this. Telehealth, for example, is one of the ways that this can be done. But let's just talk about how technology has sort of affected the whole field. First, there are some basic goals for why we use technology in our service attempts. One is to help coordinate services and to have electronic records that can be transferred, and information can be within the bounds of HIPAA, can be transferred appropriately. We also want to make service delivery more efficient, especially to clients who have limited access to it. Obviously, cost effectiveness is a huge goal, and you know, the agencies that we will hear about and have speakers from are very much sending people out on the streets and into neighborhoods to help clients at their homes, and trying to be cost effective with technology too. Technology can also improve communication between professionals. So, and a simple example of this is for training. To watch a webinar, for example, that happens here a lot. We are offered the opportunity to watch webinars that are delivered to us via a website, and we can even have live question and answer periods. I just went to one last week, actually, that was offered through our counseling department here at Sandhills, but it was mainly about students who are veterans, because we are receiving more and more veterans in the classroom, and we want to be able to understand what their lives are like, if they have special needs, whether that's through mental health or physical needs, what those are like, and so on. So that's a great and useful way to get training without having to put me up in a hotel and feed me. I can just go to a webinar right here on my campus, and this is something that's being used, I know you know this, in other kinds of work settings. Also, I'm sure this is true for you, I would much rather send an email or a group email to people who are interested or who are involved with a certain issue. I'd much rather do that than try to see them in person or to try to call them on the phone. Those kinds of technology helps save a lot of time. People can open my emails when they're able to do it. I don't end up playing phone tag with other professionals, and it's just more efficient. So the uses of technology that are appearing in human services jobs are ones that you already know about for the most part. Things like using email and being on a listserv where you might have a particular interest. I'm on a listserv for Moore County for physical violence and assault prevention, and so often I'll receive notifications about trainings that I can attend and so on. And so listservs are helpful. They're the kinds of things that you'll end up being involved with or being on. Teleconferencing or meetings, you know, through the computer are also helpful. So that's happening. Cell phones and pagers, although pagers are almost, seems like, becoming obsolete, but cell phones certainly are used by human services workers. Helps providers stay in touch with clients, but also helps providers feel safe and stay in touch with their office when they're out on the road. The The internet, or the World Wide Web as we used to call it, is another very significant contributor to services for people who need it and who don't necessarily have to drive into an office and sit and receive the services in front of someone. I just got on a website that was mentioned in our textbook for teens. Ooh, I can't remember the name of it. Teencentral.net. I would invite you to go look at that website. There's even a section on that website that is for students, young people who are military kids, if you will, from military families. And it's an interactive website. It also allows people to a safe place to tell their feelings, and someone would return an email from them or a message from the student within 24 hours. So go in there and look at that website. I just kind of explored the website. You can also set up, if you wanted to, you could set up an account and actually be able to read people's posts. For those of you who are interested in working with youth, getting on a website like that might be very helpful to you to see the kinds of things that young people are saying. People, you know, some of you who are doing your internships and you're exposed to young people all the time don't have as much of a need for that, but others of you in the classroom who don't really get that much contact with teenagers, that this could be a place for you to sort of hear the voice of how teenagers are talking these days and what's on the mind of teenagers and how do they react to each other. Let's see. Information management is another huge benefit for using technology in our field, and again, you guys know so much about this now from your own work and from your own lives, but being able to enter a client's record into an electronic file system is efficient in, you know, probably 20 different ways. And so one of the ways, though, that's helpful for human services agencies, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit, is that the computer can help us keep track of so many of the numbers and statistics that are required of us to report. And so things like how many clients we're seeing, how many clients left service provision, and feeling that the service was unsatisfactory to them, how many high school students, for example, were retained. And nonprofit agencies have to present these kinds of reports all the time, certainly annually, to their board of directors and to the people who fund them. It's nice to have a great idea about, someone in our class talked about helping young single moms, teenage moms, and what a great population that is to want to get involved with and to help them, these young ladies, learn more about managing their lives and creating a future for themselves and their families. And so if you were interested in starting a company like that, or an organization like that, a nonprofit, you would need to very closely monitor the statistics and the demographics of the people you're serving. People don't want to give money to an organization that's not serving the clients that it says it wants to serve. And so keeping statistics is really, really helpful on the computer, and churning out those kinds of numerical or demographic reports is something that directors have to do all the time. Another exciting thing for us is the ability to transfer client information. I think it's really a hard thing to do for people to have to go in and, when they're receiving various kinds of services, tell the same information over and over again, the same demographic information, your address, where you went to elementary school, where you attended high school, if you attended college, where was that, what were the years of your attendance. Having to put that kind of information or answer that kind of information on a paper and pencil form over and over and over again is a really tiresome thing for a client to have to do. And if you could transfer that sort of basic information to another agency, it's very helpful and time-saving. This also helps you be able to help clients faster. When you can read a file and know what it is that the problem is that the client needs help with, you can be more efficient with the person that you assign that client to, for example. and start gathering information to help them before you even actually first see the client and start to hear what it is they need. Let's see. Technology is also being used increasingly in our field to provide education and service to clients. This is where my earlier mentioning of telehealth comes in, or telemental health almost. There are national guidelines for people who are licensed clinical social workers and licensed counselors. There are national guidelines written, ethical guidelines about the way that you have to offer this service to clients, and mainly it's meant to be a protection to clients if they're going to be participating in online counseling, for example. There are also lots of software packages that are being used now to teach skills to people. Teaching problem solving would be one way of looking at offering that. I can see, having a software program that would help young parents understand how to interact with healthcare providers, or how to do discipline, how to choose what kind of discipline they might want to use, how to stimulate their child so they're best prepared for school. Things that if a student or a client, I should use the word client, if a client were interested in learning, you could provide that in a really efficient way to the student or the client. With clients who are mentally impaired, there are software programs that are used even just to teach daily living skills to them: cooking, simple food preparation, safe storage of food, and so on. So technology, just like it is for, gosh, every aspect of our lives now, it seems to me, is being used in creative ways. There's even a program that I heard about on public radio a couple of years ago for service members who have PTSD, and they're using smartphones now to report feelings and level of depression, level of disturbance, and having that be reported back to somebody who is their service provider. And so this, the use of technology, especially smartphones, is, I think, going to be more and more important to us as we keep going. The book then sort of shifts gear and wants us to think about some of the more modern trends that are that we will face as human services providers and workers. And the first one that they talk about is very much in the media right now for us: the idea of global population growth and mass migration. And so this is really something to read about. But by the year 2050, 80% or 86% of the world's population growth is going to be coming from less developed countries. So think about that, what the ramifications of that are. By the year 2050, 86% of the world's population growth is going to be coming from less developed nations. And so these will be potentially populations of people who may want to migrate to other countries for economic purposes. And we're seeing this happening even now. Even in current news, we're seeing a discussion of people who are actual refugees versus people who are economic migrants. And so the phrase economic migration really refers to individuals who want to move to a better place in the world where they have more chance to live a life with safety, good food, abundance of care and employment. And so this is probably really going to be an impact on developed nations, and we as the United States are one of the developed nations. So global migration is going to be something that will impact us in a lot of economic ways, but as human services workers, again, it reminds me of how we talk about how important it is to understand culture, and how important it is maybe to understand how to help someone who moves to our country assimilate to our cultural ways, because they're living in our country, It's important for them to keep their traditions and cultural values intact, but when they come to live in another country, we may end up having to really educate our clients more and more about the way things are done in this country, and that clients have to adapt to living in the Western world. So that whole issue is probably even more important than it sounds like it is, but if you read in your book, there are several statements that are made about the projected ideas of what the impact is going to be. Then another huge trend that will be with us probably for about the next 40 years is the idea of our aging society and the aging baby boomers. This group of people is currently, they were born from 1946 to, oh gosh, now I'm not going to remember it. Baby boomers, 1946 to 64, I think, is the definition of a baby boomer. And so this was a bulge of population. I've talked about this in some of my other classes, but after the war, after World War II and a little bit of time after that, there was a huge population bulge. And that huge population bulge is now reaching retirement. And this group of people is kind of unique anyway, because they are often people who went through the 60s. They are opinionated, they are youthful, they are independent, they are mistrustful of the government. They want to stay younger longer, but they are definitely people who are going to ask for their Social Security check, and they're going to expect to have government services like Medicare, the health care program. So I guess maybe the good news for us in human services is that this is going to be, for probably the next 25 to 40 years, a population that needs all kinds of services, and also great business opportunities for human services providers who might find a niche of providing something very specific to aging adults. So this trend of the baby boomers coming of age and this very large, significant population of people needing services is something that you guys as workers are going to be definitely impacted by, and it creates an opportunity for you, a work opportunity. So you may have come into this program never thinking that you wanted to work with aging adults, but there are lots of really cool opportunities happening right now with that population. Let's see. Let me move on in my notes to what else I want to say maybe about aging. So within this group of aging individuals, those seniors who are at the highest risk are mainly three groups. The older single women who have lower incomes, baby boomers with less education, and minority groups who might have less income. That's not always true of minority groups, but those people who fall in a minority group that has less income, those are going to be the people who will most be needing services as they age. Housing is going to change. Most seniors really like to age in place, and so home health is already a very big business in the United States. I remember when that started for senior adults, and some of my friends who had been nurses started to work in home health, and some of my social work friends work in home health as well. Let's see, depression is an issue for seniors. I actually participated in a study maybe 3 or 4 years now, where I went out with a friend who was studying depression, and we met with senior adults in senior living centers in this community and talked to them, took sort of like a survey about whether they would be willing to see a counselor if one was provided for them. So depression is something that senior adults experience just like people in the younger part of the population experience. But certainly depression can be more of a risk. 1 second. Just want to make sure the camera was still on. Depression can be even more of a risk because senior adults experience the loss of their vitality, they experience the loss of a loved one. Sometimes even the medications they take can cause them to have depressive symptoms, And confronting the death and dying is another reason that senior adults need our assistance. And then here's an interesting idea. We've been kind of talking about some of the sad part of being a senior, but some of the more exciting parts of being a senior in this next group of aging baby boomers is that these is in general a fairly healthy population. And they have been a population that if they smoked before, they've quit smoking. They exercise more, they get out more, we're much more interested in our diets. And so this is a vibrant group who really want to work more, they want to work longer, they want to volunteer, they want to be able to have activities that they can participate in. And so that's another really positive aspect of where service provision could be a part of your work life, doing something more on the positive side. Our Senior Enrichment Center here in Moore County is a super positive environment where seniors come for all kinds of pleasurable activities, educational activities. They themselves volunteer for things, and I can only encourage you to try to go see the Senior Enrichment Center here in Moore County. It is really a great place. We have an intern there off and on throughout our program. The last piece of what we should talk about is the section in your textbook about how our work as human services professionals may bring us into the world of clients and how they work or don't work in culture. And so let's talk about that. We've had what they sometimes call the Great Recession. And I remember when I first saw that phrase, I thought, wow, is that what we've been through? It just felt so heavy for so long. And so there's a name for this incredible loss of jobs and the financial crisis. And now writers are talking about it as the Great Recession. Well, there was a huge, many of you may have been affected by the Great Recession. My family members were, who live in Michigan. Michigan has been a big industrial state, and most of my siblings have worked in factories, and all of them have lost their jobs and now work 2 or 3 jobs, just like people in our community do. And so the workplace has changed a lot, and we will end up probably hearing stories and trying to help our clients maneuver through this new workplace. So part of this is the shift of employment opportunity from manufacturing to the service sector. I would love it personally if manufacturing jobs returned to the United States. That was a backbone of employment and decent living for so many of our citizens. I think it's just awful, really, that manufacturing disappeared so quickly and so suddenly in our culture. It's been a very, very tough thing for so many people to adjust to. And growing up in the Detroit area, for me, having people around me in my community who worked in plants and in mills, as you would say, in the South, was exciting because 2 parents could work and they could provide an education, a college education to their kids. And this is probably going to be much harder to be able to do. I do think we're hearing in the news about some manufacturing concerns returning to the United States, but I wonder if it'll ever be anywhere close to what it was before. So our clients still would be people who have lost manufacturing jobs and need to have new skills that are more related to the service sector of the industry or of our economy, really. Let's see what else I want to say. The book describes the cascading, they call it the cascading effects of the Great Recession of 2008. And when I think of that cascading, I just think of, kind of a waterfall of things happening in employment, just coming over the brink. And so 4 types of workers have emerged from this, the recession, really. One is the employed worker. This would be probably a smaller percentage of the population than even was before. People who are actually working in a job that is at the level or commensurate with the level of education they have and their skill level. I guess we would call those the lucky people in our culture right now. And then there are the underemployed. Many of my friends right now have kids who have just graduated from college during the '08